Hey friends, tonight we're going to talk about a very small decision, one that takes just 10 seconds to make, but might be powerful enough to shake an entire town. If you think pulling over on a freezing morning to help a stranger will only make you late for work, you might want to buckle up, because sometimes being late is the most perfectly timed thing you could do in your life. So before you get comfy, hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly appreciate simple acts of kindness and honest moments like this. And don't forget to leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is over there. Now, turn off the lights. Let the soft hum of your fan set the mood, and let's drift into tonight's story. The March wind slipped through the car's vents, wrapping a chilly haze around Grace Turner's neck as she drove along Route 17 toward a little diner called Miller's Diner. On her lap sat her daughter's lunchbox, lovingly packed the night before, sealed with bunny-shaped tape, now rattling slightly with every bump in the road. Grace should have clocked in at 6:30 a.m., but today she had to drop little Evie off for early tutoring, between a vocabulary quiz they hadn't studied for and a braid that kept leaning to one side. She was running late. 7:12 a.m. Grace's eyes were fixed on the dashboard clock like it was counting down the last seconds of her job security. And that's when she saw him. Right at the bend near the old gas station, an elderly man sat still beside a fire hydrant, dressed in a worn military coat and a faded Air Force cap. His hands trembled slightly, clutching a weathered canvas duffel. His gaze was cast down, but his posture said something else, as if he was trying to make himself small. Grace drove past, then slammed the brakes. In the rearview mirror, his figure grew smaller, but inside her chest it grew louder, a whisper she couldn't ignore. She turned the car around. It was a simple act: pull over, open the door, invite a stranger inside, and say calmly, "Come in and warm up, sir. It's on me. No one should be outside in weather like this." The old man looked at her, didn't say a word, then gave a small nod, the kind you only recognize if you've ever worn a uniform. A silent thank you. Grace ordered him a hot coffee and the diner's signature pancakes, the kind regulars called happiness on a griddle. She didn't think too much, just couldn't bear to walk away. But as she poured more syrup onto his plate, from behind the counter the manager stepped out. His eyes scanned the plate, then found her face. No words exchanged. And in that moment, Grace already knew that breakfast was going to come at a price. If you've ever worked in the service industry, you'll understand this. There are certain unwritten rules, and you're still expected to follow them. Like, you don't give away free food, you don't bring your feelings into your shift, and most of all, you don't do anything that might get your manager's attention. Grace knew all three rules. She also knew she had just broken every single one just to give an old man a warm meal. "Grace, HR, now." Frank Melder's voice wasn't loud but sharp enough to cut the air in the diner. Customers looked up from their newspapers. The red-haired waitress froze mid-pour. Grace gently set the fork down on her tray. She glanced back at the old man eating slowly, as if every bite of pancake was some rare luxury, then walked toward the back room. Frank shut the door behind her, arms crossed, no questions asked. "How many times have I said this, Grace? No free meals. This isn't the Mother Teresa shift." Grace kept her voice soft. "He's a veteran, Frank, sitting in the cold hands purple. It was just a plate of pancakes. Doesn't matter. This is a business, not a charity." Then came the sigh, the kind that's been planned all morning. "This isn't the first time you've let your heart lead the way. I think it's time for you to step back and rethink." He didn't need to say the words, but he did anyway. "As of today, you're no longer on the schedule." Grace didn't cry, didn't argue, just stood there. In her mind, an image flickered like an old film reel. Her daughter Evie. This month's milk not yet bought. The power bill. The English tutoring fee she'd promised to cover. All for a plate of pancakes. Some people might say, well, it's her fault. Rules are rules. If you work here, you follow policy. But others might ask if following every rule means turning your back on someone cold and hungry. Then what kind of rule is that? Grace walked out of the HR room, still unsure if it had really happened. The old man, Walter, looked up as if he sensed something. She forced a smile. Didn't want him to know. "Thank you for the meal," he said softly. His voice was slow, raspy, but carried weight. Grace nodded, ready to walk away, but Walter reached into his jacket pocket and handed her a crumpled envelope. Sometimes a meal isn't just a meal, and kindness doesn't need permission. Grace didn't open the envelope right away. She stepped out of the diner, her hands trembling, not from the cold, but because for the first time in years, she didn't know how she was going to provide for her child tomorrow. That afternoon, a soft breeze slipped through the trees along the quiet street leading to the rental complex. All the houses looked oddly alike. Gray roofs, silver-painted walls with peeling patches, wobbly fences with a few broken slats, and family nameplates scribbled by hand on thin aluminum sheets. The last house at the end, 28B, was where Grace and little Evie had lived for nearly 3 years. Just enough peace, just enough fragility. She opened the door. The faint smell of burnt toast from that morning still lingered in the air. Evie sat at the kitchen table, her legs swinging under the chair, her pale blue backpack tucked neatly by her side. Her head was lowered into a storybook, but her eyes were clearly waiting for the familiar questions. How was school today? Did anyone bother you? Want me to tell a story or cook something first? Grace smiled, but her chest felt heavy, like the sleeve she had used to hide a tear in her shirt. I learned new vocabulary today. I remembered them all, Evie said proudly. That's great, Grace replied, her voice soft, almost like a whisper, trying to cover up the emptiness behind it. She reached into her bag, pulled out Evie's untouched lunchbox, and started to unpack it, then paused, because she realized starting tomorrow that lunch might not be there anymore. She no longer had a job, no income, and no idea if they could even keep this small home next month. Evie looked at her, then asked suddenly, "Mom, why are you home early? What time is it?" Grace hesitated, then answered like she had rehearsed it. "Mom just felt a little tired, so I came home early, just for today." Evie nodded. She believed her, because to an 8-year-old, moms never lie. But the slight pause in her gaze as she turned back to her book seemed to whisper, "Mom, are you hiding something?" Grace went into her room, closed the door, and opened the envelope Walter had given her. Inside was a single piece of paper. The ink had bled slightly like it had once been wet. It read, "If the world let me survive a war, then I believe it won't abandon you for showing kindness. Don't lose faith. Walter Briggs." You know, sometimes the only person who believes in you is someone who just met you once. And the world is quietly watching to see if you have the patience to believe in it back. Grace placed the note inside her old jewelry box, the same box where she kept her wedding photo, Evie's first baby tooth, and an unpaid electric bill. A box full of real things, of life, of fragility. That night, after Evie had fallen asleep, Grace stepped out onto the back porch. The air was chilly. The roof creaked softly above her. She looked up at the sky and wondered, can a single mother recently fired with no clear way out actually change anything at all? The next morning, Grace was folding laundry in the kitchen when she heard a knock at the door. 3 knocks. Slow, not urgent like a debt collector, not timid like a mailman. She opened the door, and standing there on the cracked concrete step was Walter Briggs, still wearing that same old military coat, but this time it was neatly buttoned up. On his head, a dented steel helmet that someone had recently polished with wax. How did you know where I live?" Grace asked hesitantly. Walter didn't answer right away. He held out a worn canvas bag, said nothing. It was the kind issued in the military during the 60s, faint lettering on the side, field issue. "Do you have 5 minutes?" he asked, his eyes never leaving her face. Grace glanced inside the house. Evie was still at the table munching on toast with honey. Then she nodded. They sat on the porch bench. The same place she had sat the day before, alone with 100 unanswered questions. Walter opened the bag. No rush, no dramatic flair. Just a few old things, a black and white photo of 4 soldiers, a scratched-up medal, a folded map creased 4 ways, and at the very bottom, an unopened letter. "I was ordered to hold on to this letter if I survived the mission in '74, he said, "but I never opened it, because I figured no one would ever need to hear my story again." Grace looked at him, unsure what to say. "I don't say this often, young lady," he continued, "but yesterday when you stopped your car, I knew. You were the first person since I left the service to look at me like a human being, not like trash. You know, sometimes people don't need someone to help them up. They just need someone to see them, really see them, without looking away." Walter stood up, placed the canvas bag gently on the porch step. "I don't have much," he said, "but I once commanded 43 men, and I know when it's time to call them back." Grace frowned slightly. Call who back? He looked at her, eyes clouded with age, but somehow still shining. "You lost your job over a breakfast. I lost friends over a small mistake. But some mistakes are worth being punished for, and some actions are worth making a whole town rethink itself." Then he turned and walked slowly toward the road. Didn't look back. Didn't say anything more. On the doorstep, the old canvas bag sat quietly. Grace opened it. At the very bottom, there was one more item, a second division, Desert Echo Veterans Group pin, and beneath that, a small handwritten note. "Sometimes an army doesn't need weapons. It just needs someone brave enough to rekindle the heart of a town." 3 days after that strange meeting, on what seemed like just another ordinary morning, Miller's Diner opened its doors like it always did. Thin coffee, old frying oil in the air, and the bell over the door chiming ting-ting every time someone walked in. But at 8:23 a.m., a different sound rolled down the street, a low, steady rumble, the kind only big engines make. Each throbbed like a slow drumbeat from a distance. 3 Harley-Davidson Road Kings pulled into the lot, jet black, heavy, dusty from the road. The riders wore leather jackets, bold white letters on the back, second division, Desert Echo, we don't forget. The whole diner froze like someone had cut the power in an old story. Frank Melder, the manager who had fired Grace, looked out the window. His eyes weren't surprised, just uneasy. The 3 men stepped inside, said nothing, sat down at the window table. The first one placed a photo on the table. A faded picture of Walter Briggs with his unit, dated 1972. "We'll take 3 of whatever Walter Briggs had that morning," the bearded rider said, his voice rough, like it had been sharpened against stone. The waitress hesitated, glancing toward the kitchen. Frank stepped out, trying to smile. "Good morning, gentlemen. Can I ask, is there something special about today?" The second rider raised an eyebrow. "Not really. We just don't like how a decent woman got fired over a plate of breakfast. You know, in small towns, news doesn't spread through newspapers. It spreads through looks, through whispered, 'Did you hear?' behind the produce aisle." And the story of Grace. The single mom who got fired for feeding a veteran had already traveled farther than she knew. That afternoon, 5 more bikes showed up, then 12. Then a truck towing an American flag. A sign on the back read, "Grace, we stand with you." Miller's Diner, once quiet and overlooked, had become a gathering place. No protests, no shouting, just presence, and the steady, unblinking eyes of men who once fought for what's right, now fighting with silence that carried weight. Back at home, Grace heard the engines echoing down the street. Evie sat beside her, eyes wide. "Mom, are they coming for us?" Grace didn't know what to say. She simply nodded, her voice barely audible. Maybe for a breakfast, and maybe because they know no one should be hungry in silence. In a small town like Eldon Falls, news doesn't travel through speakers or headlines. It moves through sideways glances between grocery aisles, oddly long greetings at the laundromat, or the quiet creak of a window sliding open with a whisper. "Did you hear what happened to Grace Turner?" At first it was curiosity, then doubt. Did she really get fired just for buying breakfast for an old vet? Who even was that man? Looked more homeless than military. Still, if it's true, that's kinda messed up, isn't it? The questions drifted through the barbershop, the corner store, even the PTA chat group at the elementary school. That evening, a woman named Laura Higgins, owner of the secondhand bookstore on Main, posted a photo on Facebook. It was Grace placing a plate of pancakes in front of Walter. The lighting was dim. The moment quiet. There was no caption. But sometimes, a picture says more than 100 justifications. The post spread quickly. Soon, someone added a line beneath it. She didn't ask for anything. She just gave. And someone else commented, "Honestly, how many Walters have we passed without stopping?" By the third day, Miller's Diner started to look emptier. There were no protests, no rocks thrown, just no customers. A silent yet deliberate form of resistance. Behind the counter, Frank Melder stared at the clock. His fingers fiddled with the order pad, eyes flicking toward the vacant parking lot that looked like a Sunday afternoon during rain. He knew. No one had to say it out loud. The town's heart had turned. You know, in close-knit communities where people know which dog belongs to which porch. When someone gets treated unfairly, the town won't shout immediately. They'll wait, watch, but they won't forget. That night, a group of high schoolers taped a handwritten sign to the school gates. "We want to grow up in a town where kindness isn't punished." The letters were crooked, drawn in black marker. No one knew who wrote it. But by morning, it was still there. And below it, someone had added in smaller script, "Stand with Grace." After the story of Grace Turner, the single mother fired for giving a veteran a free breakfast, began spreading across social media, the public quickly split into two clear sides. On one side, the supporters. This isn't just about pancakes, this is about dignity. If feeding someone hungry is wrong, what part of the system is still right? But on the other side came the colder voices. She violated company policy. Good intentions don't override rules. It's fine to be kind, just don't use someone else's money to play hero. One seasoned columnist wrote in the local paper, "We live in a society built on systems. If every employee acted based on emotion, where's the fairness in that?" Just a few paragraphs later, a professor of ethics responded, "Fairness isn't something printed on paper. It shows up in doing the right thing, especially when no one else will, in cafes, offices, even classrooms." Grace's story had quietly turned into a moral test. No one referred to her as that waitress anymore. People started calling her something else, the woman who didn't look away. And then, unexpectedly, a short essay written by a 9th grade student went viral. "I don't know politics, I don't know law, but if my mom lost her job just for feeding an old man, I don't think the problem is with my mom. I think the problem is with a chair that sits so high it can't see a hungry man on the curb." The post was shared over 30,000 times in a single week, and underneath, people began typing something no one had dared say out loud before Grace was right. You know, some experts are still debating, should kindness be punished if it bypasses protocol? But in Eldon Falls, the people who weren't debating anymore were the ones starting to take action. And the sound of revving engines outside the diner wasn't going to be the last thing this town would hear. Grown-ups often take a long time to act, because they're busy weighing consequences, policies, and All the things called proper procedures. But children, they don't know how to dodge yet. They just do what their hearts tell them. This isn't right. We have to say something. On Monday morning, a handwritten letter appeared on the main bulletin board of Eldon Falls High School. The title scrawled in red marker, slightly uneven. "We're writing this because we don't want to grow up in a town where kindness gets punished." Beneath was a short letter just over 200 words, written by 4 10th graders. They told the story of Grace Turner, the breakfast she gave a veteran, and the question they couldn't stop asking: if someone gets fired for doing good, then tomorrow will we still have the courage to help anyone at all? It wasn't a speech, no dramatic punctuation, no blame. But when copies of that letter were posted in the bookstore, the bakery, even on the church wall, the town didn't go quiet from apathy. It quieted because people were listening. A week later, the letter was featured on the front page of the Eldon Falls Chronicle, a paper that almost never reserved space for student voices. Next to it, a brief editorial by a senior journalist. This town forgot that morality isn't just taught in classrooms. It's proven in daily choices. And today, the lesson came from the youngest among us. You know, some adults used to believe they were more reasonable than kids. But after that letter, many began putting down their coffee mugs and asking themselves, how many times have I stayed silent, just because I assumed someone else would speak up? At the next town council meeting, for the first time in years, a petition was brought forth. Not about budgets or public utilities, but something much simpler. We want to live in a place where kindness belongs. Elena, the teacher who oversaw the student group, later shared that the kids spent an entire afternoon arguing over one line in the letter. Not about grammar, but about tone. They didn't want to accuse. They didn't want to sound angry. They didn't want to shame anyone. They just wanted to write in a way that reminded adults what kindness felt like. And it seemed they had succeeded. There's something strange about public opinion in small towns. When it's silent, that doesn't mean it's still. It's just gathering. And at a certain point, silence becomes questions. Questions become demands. And then comes a chain reaction. Frank Melder, the manager of Miller's Diner, knew he was in the eye of the storm, but he still believed. With the right interview, the right words, the right spin, he could turn things around. "We didn't fire anyone for being kind," he told a local TV reporter. "We simply expect our employees to follow the rules. If everyone starts handing out free meals, how is that fair to paying customers?" It sounded reasonable, clean, professional. But there was one problem. It came too late. That very same day, a piece of security camera footage was leaked online. In it, Frank appeared behind the kitchen counter after Grace had left. He didn't know he was being recorded. He said, "What does she think? She's some kind of saint feeding that old man and trying to play the hero. This place doesn't need employees like that." The clip lasted just a few seconds, but it was long enough for the wind to change. The comments beneath the video weren't uncertain anymore. People weren't asking, was Grace wrong? They were asking, why is someone like Frank representing a place that used to stand for this town? One elderly woman, a regular customer for over 20 years, wrote, "I used to think Miller's Diner kept our traditions alive. Turns out it only kept the facade. The heart, they lost that long ago." The next day, a chain of events followed. Several local sponsors pulled their ads. A printing company refused to deliver the new menus. And one delivery driver left a handwritten note, "I won't deliver to a place that disrespects those who once gave everything for this country." You see, some people think power comes from what's said on television. But in Eldon Falls, power comes from what's whispered in supermarket aisles, between 2 cans of soup, or in the back pews of the church. Frank had spoken, but the town had already listened to someone else. And now they weren't coming back to the diner for breakfast. They were coming to wait for something to change. When people in Eldon Falls mentioned Walter Briggs, most only knew three things. He used to be a combat medic. He lived alone. No wife, no children. No one knew exactly where, and he was the man Grace Turner served what would become her final breakfast at Miller's Diner. Walter never liked cameras. He wasn't one for long speeches. He didn't seek attention. And he hadn't stepped into a studio since 1987, when he was quietly handed a military citation and politely declined to speak. But that Thursday morning, there he was, on the screen of Welf 9, the local news station. Old button-up shirt, no tie. A faded cap with the words U.S. Air Force, 2nd Division. The anchor, ready with a stack of pre-written questions, didn't even get to ask the first one. Walter raised a hand gently. "I just want to say one thing," he said. "Then people can make up their own minds." He looked straight into the camera. Voice raspy, slow, but each word landing like a hammer on wood. "I'm not asking anyone to feel sorry for me. I've watched friends die for a flag many folks don't even remember the meaning of. I didn't go to that diner to beg. I went there because I was hungry. And a woman who didn't know my name didn't need to choose to look at me like a human being, and she lost her job for it." He paused. His eyes didn't flinch. "I don't need medals, but if kindness gets punished, then this town needs to ask itself, are we still following the rules, or have we lost who we are?" No one in the studio moved for several seconds. There was no music, no applause, just a very long silence, and the steady gaze of a man the world had once forgotten. That night, the clip spread like wildfire. People didn't talk about what shirt he wore. No one asked for his credentials anymore. They just repeated the same line. He didn't ask for anything. Just not to forget those who once gave everything and those who dared to do what's right. That night, Eldon Falls had its answer, and the name Walter Briggs, once just that old guy, was now written in full. With respect. And in bold. Something miraculous happens when people stop assigning blame and start doing something. Just 3 days after Walter's broadcast, a petition began circulating through Eldon Falls. Not from a large organization, not launched by a lawyer, but by a high school junior named Kira Rhodes, a girl who once forgot her wallet and got a free milk from Grace. The title of the petition was Simple, Bring Grace Back. The message inside was brief, just 3 paragraphs, written in clear, sincere language that made people pause. "We are not asking for anything more than justice. We are not demanding more than an apology. We just want to see a kind person return to the place she belongs." Kira had originally hoped for 500 signatures. In less than 24 hours, the number crossed $1,000. Some who signed had never eaten at Miller's Diner. Some were Grace's former co-workers. Some were strangers from nearby towns. People who had only read the story online, but still wrote, "I don't live in Eldon Falls. But if this town has someone like Grace, I want to stand with her." At the local library, volunteers printed paper copies. At the pharmacy, elderly residents lined up to sign, hands trembling, but their names bold and deliberate. And at church, a young pastor mentioned Grace in his Sunday message, not because she's perfect, but because she chose not to look away. Frank Melder, no longer in control, at Miller's Diner, received a letter from the town council requesting an official explanation. Attached was a printed list of the first 423 signatures. At the bottom, someone had added a handwritten note. "We don't want revenge. We just want one moment of acknowledgement that she was right." You know, some experts still debate, can a single signature really change anything? But in Eldon Falls, people understood something else. A signature, even a small one, can become a promise. And when a whole town makes the same promise, doing the right thing stops being a lonely act. That morning, Grace Turner was washing dishes. Nothing special, just a few bowls from last night, a chipped ceramic mug, and the little spoon her daughter Evie always used to stir her milk. Outside the window, soft sunlight slanted through the old curtains, spilling golden streaks across the table. Nothing seemed different, until the landline rang. Grace dried her hands on her apron, picked up the receiver like it might break if she held it too tightly. On the other end, a deep, steady voice. "Good morning, Ms. Turner. This is Mayor Langston." She froze. Her heart skipped a beat. "I hope I'm not disturbing you, but I believe it's time we had a proper conversation, publicly, respectfully, and for the first time, the right way." A few hours later, Grace was at Town Hall. A small meeting room, oak-paneled walls, a soft yellow light overhead, and the faint scent of old paperwork in the air. No tribunal, no cold stares, just Mayor Langston's silver-rimmed glasses and a slim folder placed neatly on the table. "Ms. Turner," he began, "in the past few days we've heard a lot, and most of it didn't come from newspapers. It came from our citizens about you, about Mr. Briggs, about a breakfast, and about how this town may have forgotten how to say thank you." He paused, eyes steady. "We'd like to change that. Not with empty words, but with action." He opened the folder, pulled out an envelope, placed it gently in front of her. "This is the official decision. We're reinstating your employment with full benefits, but not just as a server. We'd like to offer you a position as the Community Workforce Support Program Manager, where your kindness can guide, teach, and uplift others who are just stepping into this line of work." Grace blinked, unsure if she had heard him right. "But I'm just a single mom, sir." He smiled. "And that's exactly why. Because you know how to truly see people even when the rest of the world looks away." On the way home, Grace didn't cry. She just held the steering wheel a little tighter, like she was afraid this joy might vanish if she blinked. At home, Evie was waiting by the window, eyes glowing. "Mom, anything good happened today?" Grace leaned down, kissed her on the forehead, and whispered, "Yes. Someone finally said something I never thought I'd hear in my life. Thank you for not staying silent." If you've ever lived in a small town, you'll understand this. A diner isn't just a place to eat. It's where people meet, where news spreads, where someone can sit quietly after a long shift and just breathe. It's part of a town's collective memory, like a scratch on the corner table or a faded handprint on the morning window. Miller's Diner used to be that kind of place, until it lost the most important thing a place can have: trust. After everything that happened, it seemed like the diner couldn't be saved. But then a week after Grace was reinstated, a small notice appeared on the town bulletin board. "Miller's Diner is officially under new ownership. New manager Grace Turner." Below that, a new logo. Simple, bold, the honor spot. On reopening day, it rained lightly, but people lined up at the door anyway. No one held signs, no one made speeches, just quiet, warm faces and a genuine eagerness to return to a place they thought they had lost. The new sign was hung by hand. No hired crew, just a few veterans from the Desert Echo group standing on wooden ladders, carefully pressing each letter into place as if they were rebuilding pride from ashes. Inside the place didn't look much different. Same wooden walls, same wobbly chairs. But now behind the register hung a new modest sign. "Here veterans, frontline workers, and anyone struggling will always find a full plate and a welcome." Grace didn't go table to table to say hello. She didn't need to. Her presence in a simple apron with a natural, unforced smile was enough for every guest to feel it. This place is safe again. A middle-aged man walked in, helmet in hand. Hesitated. "I once said you were wrong. On Facebook, I'm here to eat breakfast, and to say I'm sorry." Grace nodded, gestured toward the window. "Your old table's still empty. Every spring, Eldon Falls Elementary School holds a small event called Silent Hero Day. Children are invited to write short essays about someone they admire, not necessarily someone famous, not someone with medals, just someone who did the right thing when no one asked them to. This year, a third grader's essay left the whole auditorium so quiet. You could hear the wind brushing the old window panes. The writer was Evie Turner Grace's daughter. Evie stepped onto the stage in a cream-colored dress, her hair braided neatly on both sides. She held a wrinkled piece of paper with both hands and began reading in a soft but steady voice. My hero is my mom. My mom works in a diner, but she's not a famous chef. She just gave an old man a plate of pancakes. She said no one should be hungry in our town. She paused, not because she forgot, but to take a breath so her voice wouldn't shake. Then she got fired. I didn't understand. I thought if good people get fired for doing good things, who else would want to do good anymore, you know? Sometimes questions from children can shake us more than 1,000 editorials, because they don't come with defenses, they just come with truth. Evie lowered her eyes and read the last part. Now my mom is a manager at a new diner, and I'm proud of her, because she didn't get mad at anyone. She didn't talk bad. She just kept making breakfast and helping people no one else noticed. The applause came slowly, not loud, not dramatic, just honest. And from the back row, Grace sat quietly, hands clenched together in her lap. No tears, because this wasn't a moment for crying. This was a moment for knowing she had planted the right seed, and now it was beginning to bloom. After the event, the principal whispered to Grace, "Your daughter just taught this town more about character than any speech ever could." It was a quiet afternoon. At the honor spot, only a few tables were occupied. Golden light streamed through the large front window, spilling across the worn wood like warm honey. Grace was cleaning the last table in the corner. No one was watching, but every motion she made, lifting a glass, wiping the table, straightening the sugar jar, carried a certain gentle care, not because it was her job, but because now every corner of this place was part of something far greater than she'd ever imagined. The door opened softly. An elderly woman with a cane stepped inside. She didn't order, didn't rush. She simply made her way to the counter and placed a yellowed postcard gently on the surface. I was the wife of a soldier. He passed in 1984. When he came home from war, no one greeted him, no one asked. But today, when I saw you serve someone like he once was without asking for a name, I knew this town has changed because of you. Grace didn't know what to say. She simply held the woman's hand like someone holding a memory they didn't want to let slip away. That night, after closing up, Grace came home. Evie was already asleep, clutching her torn-eared teddy bear. On the table was a half-finished drawing, a woman in an apron holding a plate of pancakes, and behind her a line of people waiting. None of them wore crowns, none had medals. Just ordinary faces, tired but grateful. Grace looked at the picture and smiled softly. I'm not a hero, Evie. I'm just someone who didn't look away. And maybe sometimes that's enough. You know, some experts still debate what really drives change, power, money, strategy. But in Eldon Falls, a small town full of ordinary people, they've begun to believe something simpler. Holding on to kindness, even when no one sees it, is how everything changes. Thank you for staying with us this far. If your heart stirred even a little somewhere along this story, share it or leave a note. Not for us, but for someone out there who might still believe kindness doesn't matter. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this one, turn off the lights, let the fan hum quietly in the background, and we'll see you in the next story from Social Justice.